I just wanted to start things by showing a little bit about technology. And one of the things I like is AI, and I said to DALL-E, generate a photo of an omnipotent lawyer for me. And this is what it came up with. So of course we have the standard young white male wearing a suit and a tie, and he's messing around with some sort of scales of justice maybe, but if you have a look at them, you can see that they're completely disconnected from anything. There's no balance, there's no bottom balance on the other side, and of course there's gibberish in the background on the wall. So at least he has the correct number of fingers in this particular photo, but that's kind of about as far as we got. So I'm joined by two speakers, Jane Reardon. Jane's a nationally renowned expert on ethics and professionalism. She was the chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Professionalism for 3 consecutive years, executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. She was a trial lawyer. She advises lawyers now on ethics and professionalism and risk, and recently wrote about Can Bots Commit UPL, which I know a lot of people are interested about, and I would advise people to go and have a read to see if bots can be out there on their own practicing law. Chris Bentley on my extreme left, not meant as a label, Chris. Yeah. Managing Director and co-founder of the Legal Innovation Zone, which was the world's first legal tech incubator based in Toronto. I can't say enough about the Legal Innovation Zone. If you don't know anything about it, please look it up. It's quite amazing. He also started the law practice program in Ontario, which is a modern approach to licensing. I don't know if you know this, but in Canada, you have to article for a number of months before you can start practicing and get called to the bar. This is a different path for people to do that and gives people some practical experience as well. He was a criminal lawyer for a number of years. He was also a politician. And Chris was our Attorney General in Ontario for a number of years, in charge of all things law. He was also a labor minister at one point, and I believe an energy minister, which is leading me to believe Chris can't hold a job. And he's always looking to improve things, not just in the public interest, but also for the legal profession. And I believe has run 3 Boston marathons, which is 3 more than me.
And me.
And more than Jane. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with Jane. You were, as I said, the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission, and you've written and spoken on the issue of regulatory reform. Why do you see this as a professionalism issue?
Okay, so we lawyers have rules of professional conduct that govern how we interact with our clients. These are ethical rules about our behavior vis-a-vis clients. But when I was at the Commission on Professionalism, I spent a lot of time in the preamble to our rules of professional conduct. And in that preamble, which sets the tone for why we have rules of professional conduct to begin with, it says, law is a self-regulated profession, and with that self-regulation comes the obligation and responsibility to regulate yourself by conceiving the regulations in the public interest, not in furtherance of the parochial interests of the bar. So that right there tells us how our rules of professional conduct are formed should be to further the interest of the public and not the lawyers. I consider that a huge professional responsibility, and it's framed up right in our ethical document.
And are the rules to protect the public or to protect existing clients?
The rules themselves are primarily protecting existing client relationships. The rules that we're going to talk a little bit about now that really require tinkering or reforming often do not even govern how lawyers interact with their clients. Those are business rules, how you can share fees with other people and who can actually get a license. But the rules are just about lawyers vis-a-vis clients. And we have, and you saw it this morning in Jack's presentation, a huge access to justice gap. I think he said 55 million people experience 260 million legal problems every year, and 80% of them are unaddressed, are not addressed by us as a profession. That's a real pox on our legal house.
And there's some stats from the World Justice Project about how the U.S. is doing.
Like I think it's 1/15 out of 142 countries that were surveyed on the issue of access to civil justice.
And by comparison, I looked. Canada, the U.S. was 115. We ranked 12th out of 142 in Canada. I think part of the skewed data is probably because our population is so much smaller, but it's still a wide gap and something to keep an eye on. I mean, the whole idea, and you've mentioned it, access to justice is a huge crisis right now. And obviously something has to change, and that's hopefully one of the things we're addressing. Are the legal regulations to blame for this gap in access to justice?
Well, you mentioned access to justice is a huge problem. It has been for the entire time I've been a lawyer, but it has only become more exacerbated. It is difficult to say. I believe personally that the regulations are not the only driver of this problem, but they are a significant impediment to getting companies that may not be lawyers to deliver legal services to people who need them, for one example. And I think that we really owe it to ourselves and to the vast majority of Americans who live in a legally complex world and can't access legal services to figure out to what extent are the regulations the problems, and if so, get them changed. That's our obligation.
Is pro bono picking up some of the slack?
Pro bono has pretty much been static. A lot of people say, oh, we just need more lawyers to do more pro bono service. Now, don't get me wrong. I think pro bono service and service generally is an important part of being a lawyer, but it cannot possibly pick up the slack when the Legal Services Corporation 2022 report said that 92% of low-income Americans don't have their legal services.
I think the numbers in Canada are similar. I think 70% of people going to court are unrepresented these days. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the regulatory reform that's being looked at now?
In the U.S. or
in the
Canada?
US.
Okay, so the bright spot is, over the last several years, there have been a lot of state Supreme Courts stepping up and saying, this isn't good, we need to do something. So there's some experimentation going on across various states. One of them is, let's license paraprofessionals to fill in the gap. And we've always had paralegals. Here in the U.S., unlike Canada, which I assume you're going to talk about, they must operate under the supervision of a lawyer in the U.S., generally speaking. But now several states are providing limited licenses to trained paraprofessionals to deliver specific services, typically in the high need areas: family law, domestic, consumer debt, housing. So that is one very promising statistic. And I just want to say one thing about why pro bono can't fill the gap. If lawyers won't pick up the phone, we just learned from Jack this morning, when someone says, I have a problem that you can help me with, why do we think they're going to volunteer? We can't volunteer our way over this gap. And these are cases lawyers don't want to take.
Right.
they're not profitable. If they wanted to take them, they would take them.
The comparison in Canada is we do have licensed paralegals. They've been around since 2007. We license them the same as we do lawyers. In Canada, or sorry, I say Canada, in Ontario, they don't have to be under the umbrella of a lawyer. They're completely independent. They do small claims. They do any tribunal work. They do a lot of driving offenses, but not impaired DUIs. They just do a huge raft of legal problems, legal services that aren't tackled here, I think. It's a 2-year college diploma that you have to do to be qualified as a paralegal. And then there's also a multi-hour practical aspect when you're finished. And we are about to, in Ontario, launch into the first family legal service provider certificate, which is an add-on to, you have to be a paralegal first. And they'll be able to deliver support in a number of different family court things, like changing a child support, things like that. So it's a sort of a new approach. It's the first class started in September, and it's at a college, and it's only one college in Ontario that's offering this, but I understand they've had a huge response to this. I think entity regulation is another thing.
Yes.
That's on the go in terms of fee splitting and things like that.
Yeah, so in our rules of professional conduct in the US, Rule 5.4, lawyers cannot split fees with non-lawyers, nor can they allow non-lawyers to be a director or officer of their law firm. So that keeps lawyers and non-lawyers quite independent. And the reality is, lawyers need a whole host of experience from other allied professionals, be they accountants or project managers. The back office operations, particularly of medium to larger law firms, are quite complex. And so in Arizona and now in Washington, 2 states at least are running pilot projects where lawyers can go into business with non-lawyers, share profits, be part of the corporate ownership structure, and the data is being collected to see how does this affect the quality of legal services, the number of legal services being delivered, et cetera. In Washington, they just rolled out this entity pilot project within the last few months. And the great thing about pilot projects, which are simmering up across our states, is you can collect data and analyze it, and then another state may or may not adopt that reform. Another way to do that is the sandbox.
So let's talk about sandboxes for a minute.
You've got them in Canada.
We have them in Canada. We have them in, I'm going to say, Alberta, BC, and Ontario. I know Chris loves sandboxes. We'll let Chris speak in a minute. But it's one of the things, hopefully they're collecting a ton of data, using them in Utah, Arizona, et cetera, and Canada as well. And I think they're finding the incidence of, let's say, critical incidents is about 1 in 4,000, which is a lot lower than the sort of complaint you might have with a lawyer and a client.
Yes, yes. In Utah, the entities accepted into the sandbox are not necessarily lawyers. They are law companies, and they are individuals. And so they have a UPL, unauthorized practice of law waiver, to be allowed to deliver services in the state. They have to give reports monthly to a commission that was established by the Utah Supreme Court. That's been going on for since 2020, actually. And now Minnesota is about to launch a similar regulatory sandbox, and it's under consideration in Indiana. The beauty about that is we don't have to get through making rule changes. You know how long it takes for a state Supreme Court to get around making a rule change. Just the commas and semicolons alone will take a couple of years. So when you have a sandbox, it's not a formal rule change, but let's figure out what works, what doesn't, and together with the entrants in the sandbox, we can fashion new regulations if it's successful.
So, Chris, Jane's got me really optimistic now and kind of excited about sandboxes. It's your turn to hurt me.
So I am enormously respectful of the work that Jane's done in professionalism and pushing regulators to, and her colleagues, to do what many in this room would want to do, expand the opportunities and the means by which we deliver legal services. And I want to give a big shout out to Phil. Phil works for the regulator in the province of Ontario. He works in the professional competence area, does fantastic work. But his side gig is to attend conferences everywhere, read everything he can on innovation. He's been pushing a forward-looking agenda for decades, often to very little applause on the inside of the regulator. Kudos for him. So let me start here. Appeal to professionalism first, last, and always. Appeal to ethics first, last, and always. It's not fast enough, it's not far enough, it's not ambitious enough to meet the moment. And the moment is what you saw this morning and what you all know, is that technology is moving too quickly. We don't have time for experiments or sandboxes anymore. The technology is moving. The legal need is, as it's been since I was called to the bar, which was a few years ago. And the willingness of people who aren't trained in anything to look for any tool that will assist them in obtaining an answer to their problem. You've seen it in medicine. You see it in banking. You see it in business. You see it in life. Do we really think it's not going to happen in law? Do you think it's not happening in law? And so what we need is a regulatory approach and structure that respects your professionalism first, the speed of technology, and meets the moment. Now the sandboxes. You asked me about the sandboxes. I've had something to say about the sandboxes, and based in part on what I'd seen as the history of sandboxes, particularly in Ontario, often dedicated to work that was not-for-profit, under very strict regulation. Gathering of evidence is fantastic. We've got a lot of evidence, and an unwillingness on the regulator to act on the evidence. We know that other jurisdictions, England, for example, has a much less regulated profession than ours does or that the United States does. No evidence that consumers, businesses are being served in an unprofessional manner to any greater degree than lawyers do. And Jane's work would probably support the notion that tech companies, with or without legal founders, are at least as good at what they do as lawyers do. So I would say that the time for these experimental sandboxes to try things out and wait a few years is simply going to miss the moment and miss the tech change that you need to be ahead of.
So let's talk about one of these tech changes, because COVID, as you know, changed a lot of things in Ontario that didn't change back after COVID.
You know, I love that. I came back from a legal tech conference on March 11th, 2020. I knew I shouldn't have gone to it because of the talk about COVID. I came back, got in my car, told my staff, don't go into the office tomorrow, we're done. Well, the university hasn't said, it doesn't matter, we're done. We're out of here, we're not going back. You knew it was a big deal when they canceled professional sports events in the United States. Whenever something's a big deal, that happens, it's a big deal. You know, up to March 11th, 2020, they said, you can't do things online. You can't have online hearings. You shouldn't do your interviews online. It's ineffective. It won't be the same. It might be unprofessional. And we suggested this 5 years before because business has been doing it for 20 years. Lousy tech, but they've been doing it for 20 years. Oh, no, you can't do that. You know, in a nanosecond, I'll just say this. Many in the legal profession, using their own enlightened self-interest, realize that if we were all prevented from meeting, we couldn't transact a lot of work unless we did it online. It's enlightened self-interest that moves a lot of life. The professionalism was exactly the same before and after. The ethics were the same before and after. I'd been dealing with criminal clients on the phone for the 23 years that I dealt with. I never saw their faces. Sometimes I wish I didn't see their faces. But you can do things in a different way. Never let people define the importance and the value of what you do as a lawyer only by the means by which you do it. And that's the point, if you'll allow me, I just want to go to, because I want to harness and unleash your momentum. I want to empower who you are, what you can do, and the value you bring to your clients. We should turn the regulatory approach on its head. First, if you have a license to practice law, in Ontario, Canada, that means mandatory insurance. If you're prepared to put your name to it, I'm prepared to stand by your professionalism and ethics. Let you work with the tech that you want and with the professionals you want in the arrangements you decide to, because there's no evidence that working with someone who's not a lawyer deprives you of ethical responsibility, none whatsoever. Allow you to move to the full extent of the value you can deliver by whatever means you can deliver it. Flip the regulatory approach on its head. You got a license? I stand by it. You've been through it. You understand your professionalism and ethics, and you should be enabled and empowered to lead that.
There's a regulator I won't mention in one of the provinces in Canada, so that doesn't narrow it down at all, that won't let you store your accounting information in the cloud if it's going to be outside the province, which seems somewhat backwards in this day and age. They also have a multi-page guidebook on how to use the cloud, which is interesting as well. How are lawyers, and I'm going to toss this out to both of you, sort of as a call to action, what is it lawyers need to do besides trust themselves? Because I know in the US, the specter of the unauthorized practice of law is big. And Jane, I know you mentioned to me, and I didn't know this, that it's a felony in a couple of states, and I think it's up to a maximum of 5 years to be practicing law when you're not authorized. It's a little less serious in Canada, I think. They might get an injunction to prevent them from doing it, but no one's going to jail, usually. What's the call to action for the people out there to start to get change if change is appropriate?
Do you want me
Go
to
ahead.
start?
Sure. Go ahead, Jane.
So I just want to say, I love the philosophy of Chris's approach, but the reality is, in the US, you have pretty strong state Supreme Courts and commissions that are not going to very easily allow themselves to be turned on their heads, and they're not going to say, oh, you have a license, I trust you're going to do that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, we are in a pretty siloed, stagnant situation where each state Supreme Court, not realizing that they are actually regulating an economic market, is in charge of their state's rules, regulations, including how they prosecute unauthorized practice of law. The activities of the bar associations may be aggressive or not, depending on the state. There's a whole host of statutes as well as rules that will apply to both lawyers and non-lawyers who may venture into the unauthorized practice of law. So, in my opinion, it has to be, at this point in time anyway, a state-by-state approach. every lawyer should get involved with their regional or state bar association, especially if your Supreme Court justices are elected. They listen very carefully to the bar associations, and you should be heard. Many states, I think the last I counted, 14 or 15 states are running task forces on the future of our practice. And if you want to get involved and rabble-rouse in increments, I would encourage you to do that. I think it does have to be an iterative process here in the U.S. I hope that we have time, because I do share the imperative expressed by both Chris and Phil that AI and the exponential progress of technology is making it very important that we figure this out, because if we don't, we being the legal profession, just go down to the vendor exhibit hall and give it over to the tech companies, because it is going to happen. We have the society has the technical capabilities to deliver services, and there is a moral imperative that we, the legal profession, not stand in the way of accomplishing this. And if I can say, it will not only help those who are seeking legal services, it will help those who are delivering legal services, as you've seen. It will make lawyers more profitable. You'll be practicing law at the top of your license. It will be more rewarding, and we will lift all boats, so to speak, so that people who need legal services can get them. But it takes lawyers getting involved with bar associations and the state Supreme Court committees.
So I would say this. You don't have a lot of time for that process. I don't think you have time for that process. The technology, as you saw this morning, is accelerating so quickly. You have a huge amount of value that you bring as lawyers. And it's not in the way that we do a lot of the simple tasks. But using tech and moving up the value chain requires engagement immediately. Education, you can do on your own time or with your colleagues without a client interface. Understanding, you can do on your own time without a client interface. Letting colleagues know what can be accomplished. And making sure you know what tech companies can accomplish, either from within your state or our province or from somewhere else. Letting people know what can be accomplished by the tech itself will be enormously important. That process, the regulatory process, is just going to take too long. It will not allow you to stay ahead of the wave, and here's the wave. You've known for decades, the profession has known for decades, I have, but maybe not you, about the huge need, not just from the indigent, but from people with lots of money. The need is there. If anything, it's got even bigger than it was, if that was possible. Entrepreneurial drive and spirit has been there forever. What's changed is the technology and the capacity to put the other two together and to deliver what people get in other areas of their life. Medicine, business. And create solutions for problems that haven't been able to be solved by our collective either service or pro bono goodwill. That's what's happening at the moment. And what I say to the licensing candidates we've got is I practiced pretty much the same way for 2.5 decades. I said, I can get you over the licensing bar today. That won't do you any good. The world you're going to experience in a couple of years' time is fundamentally different. You know that old saw? It was up on one of the slides this morning. Expressed differently by Bill Gates. You know, we always overestimate what's going to happen in 2 years and underestimate what's going to happen in 10 years. And you know what my answer is? What year do you think it is? Because I think it's year 12. The heart of a good lawyer is preparation. You don't prepare for the things you know are going to happen. That's what you do. You don't just prepare for the things you reasonably think might happen. You prepare for the things that you're not sure will happen, but if they happen, the effect is significant. That's what we need to do.
And if I could just sum that up, he says, break things and ask for forgiveness later.
I think that's what he
That's his
said.
regulatory reform.
Thanks very much, everybody. I hope you guys had fun.
Thank you.